Senator Paterson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy President, and it is great to be back for a new parliamentary year. Welcome back, colleagues. I regret to say, though, it appears that the opposition has decided to start the new parliamentary year by taking the low road. Instead of focusing themselves today on weighty matters of state, on substantive issues of policy, they've instead decided to pursue a strategy of personal smear, of personal destruction and personal attack. It's a familiar theme for those opposite, and I have no doubt that further on in the Take Note debate we'll hear more of it. As a government, though, we're focused on the things that actually matter to the people of Australia, that actually affect their lives. And I'll take up Senator O'Neill's interjection about the Banking Royal Commission. The opposition is very focused on playing petty politics here, on point scoring about who called for a Royal Commission when. They're very fond of pointing out for the fact that they called for a Royal Commission before we did. What they're less fond of admitting to and acknowledging is, in fact, that there was a time when they too opposed a Royal Commission, and in fact when they in this chamber voted against a Royal Commission when the Greens first presented that motion here in this chamber. So we could have a debate about who was first in favour of it, who's been in favour of it longest, or we could instead focus on the substantive recommendations, the 76 recommendations made by Commissioner Hayne, and how they will improve the lives of the Australian people, how they'll improve the trust in the banking system. Of course, when the government received the Royal Commission's recommendations, the opposition made a big song and dance about how we were taking far too long to release it and far too long to respond to it. Well, in just a matter of days, the government was able to release a comprehensive response to the Banking Royal Commission in full and allowed the markets and the Australian public to observe our response. The opposition, on the other hand, who have now had twice the length of time that the government has to provide our response, is yet to provide any substantive response to the Royal Commission. In fact, all they have done is say, prior to the release of the recommendations, that they would implement them in full. What an unthinking promise that was to make. What a careless promise that was to make. Instead, now that they've realised perhaps there might be a recommendation in there or two that they're not completely delighted by, or more importantly, key constituencies of theirs, such as the union movement and the industry super funds that they control, might not be completely delighted by, they've instead moved to say that they will adopt all 76 recommendations in principle, whatever that means. We're yet to know what that means. And yet they have the gall to come in here, in this chamber and the other place, and say that this parliament needs to sit for extra weeks so that we can progress the recommendations that they don't even know what they're going to do with yet. Quite a claim. One other observation made today by those opposite that no doubt we'll hear more of this week is the 26 times which the government is alleged to have voted against a Royal Commission. I haven't checked that figure. I'm not sure it's right. One figure that I do know that's absolutely right, though, is the 22 times that those opposite in this chamber voted for a piece of legislation that their opposition leader, that their shadow cabinet, is now desperately trying to amend in the lower house, because they've realised the disastrous consequences of that bill.
Shocking.
Every single one of you voted for a bill that your leader and your shadow cabinet now acknowledges could have allowed child sex offenders, murderers and other criminals to come to Australia without any recourse for the minister to prevent that from happening, without any recourse at all. You voted for a piece of legislation 22 times that even the opposition leader, Mr Shorten, recognises now is a dangerous piece of legislation that urgently needs to be amended in the House of Representatives. Well, I hope, if they are successful in doing that, I hope when it comes back here that at least some of you have the decency to stand up and admit how wrong you were to hastily vote for a piece of legislation that had been poorly drafted, that had been ill thought through, and the advice of security agencies had not been sought for before deciding on those votes. Because that is on your heads. It is on your heads, not just what you propose to do, but the legacy that you left from your government. As we heard in question time today, the 1,200 deaths at sea that occurred under your watch when you last tried to weaken our border protection laws, the 50,000 people who arrived by boat when you last weakened our border protection laws, the 800 boats that arrived, the 17 new detention centres that have to be established, the thousands of children that were placed in detention, which this government has got out of detention. We've been able to get those kids out of detention. We've been able to get those kids off Manus and Nauru because we have put first and foremost a strong border protection regime that discourages people from getting on boats in the first place. And yet again, You've proven that you have not learnt the lessons of history, that you're prepared to make those same mistakes again.
Thank you, Senator Paterson. Senator